Coming up on Chasing the Natty, only 2 weeks are left in the 2025 college fantasy football season, and while most of you pretty much have your teams locked and loaded for your playoff runs, there are still a few things to discuss. We got a few players we'll discuss whether or not they're worth starting the rest of the way, and then we have some more waiver wire pickups for you, just in case you need that little extra boost for your teams. All of that and more coming right after this.
Sellers picks his way to the right and is tripped up, reaching for the end zone. Touchdown. What a start.
Give it to Reed, and there he goes. Nobody's going to catch him. Touchdown.
It's caught. Jeremiah Smith. Touchdown, Ohio State. The legend grows.
This is Chasing the Natty, a college fantasy football podcast. All right, welcome in everyone. This is Jared Palmgren, host of the Chasing the Natty podcast. Hope you guys are having a wonderful ride to your work on this Monday morning. We are the college fantasy football podcast on the Campus of Canton Podcast Network. You can find us on all of your podcast feeds and on YouTube every Monday morning and Tuesday night during the season. If you want to support the great work we do here, head on over to campusofcanton.com. Subscribe there with any of our phenomenal tiers. We got content ranging on all sorts of college football games, whether it is CFF, Devy, C2C, college DFS, underdog best ball. If you play it, then we've got content, whether that's tools, rankings, pretty much everything you need to succeed. In fact, right now, if you want to support the show directly, make sure when you sign up for one of our yearly membership tiers over there, you use the promo code NATTY, N-A-T-T-Y, to get 10% off your yearly membership. Again, that is promo code NATTY, N-A-T-T-Y. If you can't do that, you can just show us some love by leaving a like, a comment, and subscribe on the YouTube side of things. If you're on the podcast side of things, just leave a 5-star review. Make sure you are following the show. That shows us support, but also it shows college fantasy football in general a ton of support. The more we grow, the more all of us content creators grow, the more the game grows, all that great jazz. If you got any further questions or just want to get in touch for whatever reason, you can contact me and the show on Twitter. I'm at CFF_Jared. The show is at Chasing the Natty. I don't know about you guys. This is a part of the season where nerves really start to kind of get to me a little bit, right? Because as much as I love this game, this is the point in the season where I can see the end. And it's not that I'm like, I want it all to be over, but you just know that all the hard work you've been putting into this throughout the offseason, especially over the last 12 weeks, right? Like, you know it's about to come to an end. You're going to find out, am I winning my league this year? Am I going to get that second place? Whatever, right? Like, the nerves are kind of building up. You're scared that one little mistake is going to ruin several weeks worth of work. And let me be very clear to each and every one of you. If you are in the Final Four for your team or for your league, that's already a pretty amazing accomplishment, considering that, there are 8+ teams or however many teams you have in your league that wish they could be where you are right now. Trust me, there are a couple leagues that I am not in. I was not in the playoffs for this year, and boy, do I got FOMO, man. So like, give yourself a pat on the back. Like, no matter what happens over the next 2 weeks, just know you worked hard. Even if you don't get the prize money or whatever comes out of your league, right, to show physically all that hard work went into, just know that I'm proud of you. And you should be proud of yourself because, again, this is a hard game. And to get where you guys are is pretty incredible. So enough of that. Again, like I said, it is like the light at the end of the tunnel is there. And, we're just kind of at the point where, we want answers. We want to see our work pay off and everything. So yeah, we're here to make sure that we do everything that we possibly can. We do the work to make sure that you guys are in good standing to, be in a good position to win your leagues. And one of the things you can do is going and checking out, obviously, our tools at campusofcanton.com. Specifically, the rest of the season rankings, they are up under the CFF tab. They should be updated as of Monday night, so you can take a look and see. A lot of you have been asking me who are some players that could really pop off during the last couple of weeks. Who should I be more worried about? That's a great place to start. Obviously, we'll have our weekly projections up there as well. You can check that out. Obviously, you can check out the live show that I have this week at Tuesday night at 8 p.m. We'll be back to Tuesday night. Last week, sorry for throwing you guys off a little bit, but I did have to delay the stream one day. We'll be back to Tuesday nights this week, and we should, if all things go well, be having a guest join us this week. So you guys be excited about that. With all that being said, y'all, let's get to it. Again, we're gonna do the freak out scale in a way here today. Again, I didn't go through all the stuff of making the graphics. I gave Nate and Chris K the week off. Again, they got their own teams to prepare for and everything, so I didn't ask them their thoughts, but I did reach out to the NIL tier over at campusofcanton.com's Discord to ask them what kind of what players are they really worried about, and I figured the first 4 players that were mentioned are pretty reasonable in terms of, I know for a fact there are a lot of people, myself included, that are quite worried after, some lackluster performances from these guys recently. So we'll start at the top here. And we'll go with wide receiver Chase Hendricks out of Ohio. Obviously, been just absolute dynamite this year. This man has. He is currently, I'm trying to pull it up. He is currently wide receiver 22 on the year. I know he's gotten into the top 12 at some point this season, but he has dropped down a little bit recently. Why? Back-to-back games here over the last couple of weeks where it has just been disappointment after disappointment, right? 9 targets, 3 catches, 40 yards versus Miami of Ohio. And then things got even worse this past week against Western Michigan. 6 targets, 2 catches, 13 yards. Just pitiful performance this past week. And so understandably, a lot of people kind of freaked. This dude was on fire for a good chunk of the season. Now things seem to be falling apart a little bit right here towards the end. And I'm here to say you guys should be good moving forward. Ohio gets UMass this upcoming week. If there's going to be a game where he bounces back, that's the game. I don't think there's any way I could sit Chase Hendricks against that UMass defense there. They give up pretty much 40-plus points to every single team. And if you think that Ohio's going to score 40-plus points, you can be pretty dang sure that Chase Hendricks will be one of those guys to find the end zone. Again, a lot of you are kind of still pointing at the last couple of weeks, what happened there. What happened there is simple, guys. That Ohio faced 2 of the best defenses in the MAC, specifically against the pass. Miami of Ohio is really good. Western Michigan, they're totally fine to get into slogfest, and it was made even worse by the fact that there was a ton of rain in that game versus Western Michigan. That was never going to be a place where a receiver was really going to be able to be productive, right? Even a guy as good as Chase Hendricks. Just, again, I don't want to say bad luck, but it is just one of those things that just unfortunate circumstances the last couple of weeks. It gets better this week against UMass. If he doesn't perform against UMass, it makes him a very easy sit in championship week. Hopefully it's not a bust in that sense where, now you're missing out on the championship. But let's say you start him, you still make it and everything, and he doesn't work out against UMass, then yeah, there's no way I would start him against Buffalo at that point. But the likelihood is he'll go off against Buffalo this week, should have a really nice game there. Or, go off against UMass this week. Buffalo's the one that's a little bit more dicey. Buffalo's been a pretty solid defense in the MAC this year, but they're also not in any way, shape, or form a defense that I would say I would be scared to start Chase Hendricks against, right? Again, Miami of Ohio, Western Michigan, they've been really them and NIU, I would say, have been kind of the pinnacle of defenses for the MAC this year. And I think Ohio, didn't Ohio just destroy NIU not that long ago? I might be thinking of a different game. There's one game where I was like, oh yeah, NIU's got a pretty solid defense. Double check myself on that before I get myself in trouble. Yes, they did play Northern Illinois, and they put up 48 points on them. I could see a very similar thing happen with Buffalo. Long story short, start Hendricks with confidence. I think he'll have a bounce back couple of games here. I think he's set up well. Meanwhile, Robert Henry, man, this is not to be trivial about this, but like this is like an unexpected death in the family, right? Like Henry was, he started off the season so well. Things definitely started getting a bit more shaky as the season went along, but he had some solid weeks here and there, but it was really a lot of kind of dud games. Had one good game there in week 8, and then you're kind of hoping that okay, things are going to get better, and then things just dropped off a cliff. 9.6 points in week 10, 4 points in week 11, and then a whopping 1 yard on 8 attempts this past week against Charlotte. He did get injured from what I can tell, but unfortunately, this might be the end for Henry. Like, there's no way, given the trend of the last couple of weeks, you can start Henry going forward. Right? In fact, I'm actually going to put out Will Henderson as one of our running back pickups for this week because I'm that certain that even if Henry is still around, like, not only can we not play him, I don't think the staff can play him. Again, he hasn't really been great in the second half of this season. Meanwhile, Henderson's definitely been on the ascent. So yeah, Henry, for those who've been worrying about him, that's still been trying to start him. I hate that it kind of took this long to really kind of fully put the nail, like, to give up the hope that he would bounce back, but that's just where we're at here. So yeah, Robert Henry, zero chance I would be starting him unless in week 13 he comes back, blows, like, has a really nice performance. Then you can have hope for week 14, but even still, like, I don't want to trust that going forward. Next up, Danny Scudero out of San Jose State. Wide receiver 2 on the year. Unfortunately, kind of getting some flashbacks from Nick Nash, right? Nick Nash did finish as the wide receiver 1 for CFF last year, but those of you who remember, Nick Nash, as great as he was, did start to fall off in the second half of the season. Now, we could blame the quarterback change at that point, right? Like going from Emmett Brown to Walker Eget. Walker Eget was very detrimental to Nick Nash. Now, Nick Nash still had good games, don't get me wrong. Again, he still finished as wide receiver 1 overall. But there was a noticeable drop from the first half of the season to the second half of the season. Very similar thing going on here, right? Like, we have seen Scudero, really, I'd say the last 4 games. Like, obviously, he had that awesome game in week 10, 37 points there, but 6.6 points against Air Force, which is, by the way, one of the worst secondaries in the country, so that's worrisome. You got 4.9 points versus Nevada this past week, who, again, they're not like a porous secondary, but, losing 55-10? What the heck's going on with San Jose State? Yeah, this is for sure worrisome. I can't even really point to and say, like, oh, well, these were, like, kind of like with Hendricks, I can point at Miami of Ohio and Western Michigan and be like, oh, well, this is just bad matchups, right? Can't really do that here. And the unfortunate thing is for Scudero, San Diego State and Fresno State are on the docket here. That's 2 of the better secondaries that San Jose State will have faced this year, and they're trending the wrong direction. Like, they put up decent numbers versus Air Force, which, again, unfortunately, Scudero just didn't hardly get any of. This past week, how many yards did Eget throw for? Was it, 74? And then you bring in, God, I can't remember the backup quarterback's name. I can picture it in my mind, but I'm gonna botch this pronunciation so badly, so please forgive me. Emisone, the quarterback, came in. He looked a lot better. Right, like things started kind of getting going with him once they benched Eget this past week and started going from there. But by that time, it was too little, too late. You're throwing Emisone in a bad situation there. But again, he was throwing for about I'd say 11.2 yards per attempt. Just doing math off the top of my head, I don't have that number in front of me, but far better than whatever the heck Eget was doing. He was throwing for dang near 3 yards per attempt. Hopefully, I'm personally hoping that's the last we see of Eget. He's not been a good quarterback really for the longest time. He was just good enough to get Scudero the ball earlier this year, but now obviously that's falling through here. And so, yeah. it feels so wrong to bench a guy who has been wide receiver 2 on the year. But I don't think in week 13, especially with San Diego State's defense being as solid as it is, I don't think you can start him this week. Which, again, it sounds so wrong. But again, this offense is just trending in the wrong direction. And you should be able to find some wide receivers that can replace him for just this 1 week. If he bounces back off, great. Or if we get some more consistency, great. Start him championship week. Actually, I'm going to rephrase this because again, if Egat is starting this week, no way I'm starting Scudero this week. If Amasone is starting, I think I can talk myself into Scudero coming back in for that. And kind of trusting that and hoping the change at quarterback kind of sparks this offense again. It could be something that San Diego State hasn't really seen before in terms of what his talent is and how they use him. So maybe that kind of opens things up a little bit more. I don't know. Scudero, very worrisome though, and it's nothing to do with Scudero. He's awesome. He's fine. It's just this entire offense is kind of falling apart here. Last but not least is Drew Messemaker. I put out a tweet referring to this situation, and it has everything to do with Caleb Hawkins. Caleb Hawkins is a beast. Caleb Hawkins is awesome. He is RB2 on the year. He has put up in his last 2 games 46.1 fantasy points and 51.5 fantasy points. Just an absolute monster. He's probably the reason why a lot of people are in the playoffs as of right now. The thing is, though, he is just an absolute touchdown monster. And it is sucking things away from Drew Messemaker. Right? 9 touchdowns in 2 games. 1, not sustainable hardly at all. But also, I keep saying that, and it keeps happening over and over again. This is not an unnormal thing that has been going on for Caleb Hawkins. He has put up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or no, never mind, I can't count. 4 35-plus fantasy point games this year. Because they just keep giving him touchdowns. And Messemaker has absolutely seen detriment because of that. Messemaker now down to QB 26. Earlier in the year, he was as high as QB 8. QB 8. Not that long ago in week 9, he was QB 8 on the season, and because of Hawkins, he has just been dropping ever since. Last 2 games, 7.9 fantasy points versus Navy, 20.42 fantasy points versus UAB because, Eric Morris was kind enough to actually let Drew Messemaker throw 2 touchdowns in that game. And so, yeah, my thought is here that regardless of what's going on with Hawkins, North Texas has still put up 31 points and 53 points in their last 2 games. Yes, Hawkins has been the majority of those touchdowns. You have to think that there will be some kind of touchdown regression at some point. And if they're continuing to score like that, we should see a 3-4 plus touchdown from Messemaker at some point in the playoff. You get Rice, you get Temple. My thought process is here. Rice, on paper, an okay defense, right? They're not a good enough defense to stop North Texas, but it's enough to where if you have other studs at quarterback, maybe you go with them over Messemaker. And that gives you 1 more week to figure out, is the Hawkins touchdown numbers, is this a trend, or is it just 2 really good back-to-back weeks here? And Messemaker will, and, if Hawkins does, obviously there's no way you can start Messemaker because that's just going to be the way things are from here on out. And if Messemaker does have a really nice game and Hawkins' touchdown numbers kind of, regress a little bit there, then I think he's a startable option versus Temple because then that there's at least a shot of him being able to get those touchdowns. But also at the same time, might be just good to maybe avoid the situation altogether if you have other stud quarterbacks. But I imagine this is for the teams who have been relying on Messemaker through about 9 weeks in the season, and then now recently things have kind of started falling apart. So, with that being said, that's enough of the waiver wire traps, or not the waiver wire traps, the freak out scale list, guys, for this week. Again, I hope I give you a good enough breakdown. If you are deciding whether or not to start those guys or not, it gives you a good idea of whether or not you want to. But as of now, let's go ahead and hop into these waivers. Some of you might be thinking, what's the point at this point? There can't be that much left on the board. And, you're not entirely wrong. And I do know that most of you have your teams pretty much figured out. But also, if you're listening to this show, I don't think you wouldn't be doing that unless there was at least some part of you that wasn't at least curious to see if any of the guys we discuss here today could give you that extra little boost. And there's also some of you out there, and let me be very clear, I'm not making fun of anybody here. I am one of these people, is that at least in a league or two, you kind of snuck into the playoffs, right? Like, maybe it was because of some head-to-head matchup you won back in week 2 you completely forgot about, and, you've won just enough that you've just, somehow snuck into the playoffs when you thought you weren't going to. And you kind of look at your team and realize, like, all right, yeah, I'm in the playoffs. This is great, but boy, there are some way better teams in this playoff that I probably shouldn't be a part of. So you need some help on the waiver wire, is what I'm saying. And so, for those of you who are out there, again, I'm one of you. There's a league of mine where I was 10th in scoring, but somehow snuck in as the 6th seed. And, I look at the top teams and boy, they feel like a tier above mine. And so I'm with you guys, is what I'm saying. Like, again, I'm not making fun of anybody here. I'm saying, like, I understand it, and this is where things, like, why this is valuable. In terms of the actual guys we have here today, as I kind of mentioned, stuff's pretty shallow. Again, we're going into week 13, second to last week of the season. It better be shallow, otherwise we're not doing our job. But at quarterback, pretty much set for this year. Like, I don't really think there's any real new names to discuss outside of some of the guys I'll bring up here today that all kind of fit the same risk pattern here, where they are backups who are currently starting, and I have no idea whether or not they'll even be starting this upcoming week or the week after, if they have a bye this week. And because of that, they're just huge risks. And in a playoff setting, like, that's a real big risk to run. But I still feel like I need to talk about them here. Definitely pay attention during the honorable mentions if you are looking for some decently still available guys who are locked-in starters who could be some pretty good help down the line here. At running back, kind of couple of late-breaking stars. Like I said last week, it's kind of surprising how many good running backs we're getting this late in the season. So if you are struggling there's some opportunity to pick up some guys, including one who put up a 50-point burger this past week. You guys know who that is, I'm sure. And then at receiver, a quiet week last week, but this week we got a couple of solid options who are kind of emerging here in the last couple of weeks. I think they can provide some consistency for the final 2 weeks. So, with all that being said, let's get on to it. Let's start with the quarterbacks. And like I said, all 3 of the quarterbacks I'm highlighting here today follow the exact same pattern. They are backups who have performed really well as the starters, but I don't know if they're actually going to remain the starter the rest of the year, because either, injury news is hard to come out of these programs, or, I don't know where the staff's heads are at, right? I wouldn't be highlighting these guys if they weren't performing well, but does the staff feel that way, right? Are these guys doing enough to hold on to the job even if the other starter were to come back from injury? I don't know. But let's start with our first guy here, Roman Gagliano. This past week, Roman threw 42 times, completed 25 of them for 389 yards and 2 touchdowns. He also ran the ball for 14 yards 14 times for 82 yards. So very good performance from Roman Gagliano. Some context behind everything here, like, the Blue Raiders offense for Middle Tennessee has really been a disappointment the last couple of seasons. Like, under Derek Mason, it shouldn't be too surprising. He's a defensive-minded head coach. We knew coming in that was probably going to kill a lot of the fantasy relevance we'd seen come out of Middle Tennessee State recently. I don't think anybody really saw the fall that, Vattiato was going to get. Like, he's been fine, don't get me wrong. Like, he's been very consistent, but not quite high enough producing to be a CFF contributor. Despite, the fact that he's throwing 40 plus times a game, it's just that this offense is so inefficient. It is so conservative. They're not pushing the ball hardly down the field at all. But I do find it very interesting that now that Vattiato has been injured in the week last week against FIU, Gagliano comes in and he is making the most of his opportunity, and it feels like a very different offense under him. And that could spell for good news down the stretch, right? Like, Gagliano, when he came in for Vattiato in the game against FIU, he wasn't super impressive in that one quarter he played there. But this past week against Western Kentucky is a totally different matter. He threw the ball 42 times, again for 389 yards, 2 touchdowns. That's 9.3 yards per attempt. That is easily the most efficient performance by an MTSU QB this season. It could go well into last season. Like, he was great in this game. And on top of that, like I said, he got to show off some work with his legs, the 82 yards rushing. That all culminated in a 30-plus fantasy point performance. Certainly better than anything Vattiato has done recently, if not this total year. If I were in charge of the Blue Raiders team, I'd keep riding Gagliano and work towards the future. Sorry, Vattiato, you're headed to run the local Bojangles. Gagliano's our young guy in the future. I would want to get him reps, especially when, the season's already over. They got like 2 wins on the season. They're not going bowling or anything, so it's like, might as well start working towards that. But again, that's the issue, isn't it? Like I kind of mentioned, we don't know what's in these coaches' head. Gagliano looked better on the stat sheet, but he also did all this in a losing effort, right? They only put up 26 points. Western Kentucky torched them on defense. Who's to say that they don't go to back to Vattiato out of sheer loyalty? Bunch of things there, right? Like it's really hard to piece together. So what I can tell you though is if Gagliano does somehow hold on to this job, his final 2 games are Sam Houston and New Mexico State. Both of those squads on average are giving up 250 plus through the air. This offense has been very disappointing this year, but these 2 matchups are lining up perfectly for Middle Tennessee to really take advantage of. And if you are somebody who is more inclined to still play matchups in the playoffs rather than like fully just starting your studs, this is definitely a place you need to keep your eye on. Again, Gagliano 0% rostered. He's going to be available everywhere. Definitely something to look out for this week. The other guy to take a look out for is Mr. Joe Pizenski, the quarterback out of FIU. Again, 0% rostered as well. Good performance this past week, 24 for 34 for 206 yards and 2 touchdowns through the air. He also ran the ball 8 times for 40 yards and a touchdown. Like I said, another backup quarterback. I really can't tell you if he'll even start another game this year. This is just so much fun. That's just the state of the quarterback waiver wire at the moment. But in all seriousness, Pizenski has been filling in for longtime FIU starter Keon Jenkins these last couple of weeks, and he has performed pretty dang well. Like, I'd actually argue that he's gone well above and beyond what you would expect. In the 4 games prior to Polanski's starting, FIU is averaging 20.5 points on offense. With Polanski under center over the last 2 games, they've averaged 45 points on offense. Like, I don't think that has everything to do with Pizenski, but that is not nothing, right? And so if he does continue to start again, it's so I have no clue what Jenkins' injury is. I have no clue if he'll be out for the rest of these last couple of games or not. But if Pizenski does hold on to this job, I do think that he can turn into a really late season breakout option at quarterback, so long as he can hold on to this job, right? Like, last couple of weeks, he's put up games of 33.5 fantasy points, 26.2 fantasy points. The production hasn't been great. He's been averaging about 230 yards through the air and 26 yards on the ground. That's not a super great floor. But because FIU's offense has just been scoring so much in these last couple of games, he's been a touchdown machine, right? 8 touchdowns in his last 2 games. I know Jenkins has been the face of this program for years now, but again, given the last couple of weeks, I don't see why the staff wouldn't try to just kind of ride out the season here with Pizanski. And like Agliano, if Pizanski can't hold on to this job, the final two matchups are golden. Jacksonville State and Sam Houston. We already talked about Sam Houston. Once again, both these teams give it up 250 plus a game through the air. God, I love the CUSA. He really could just be another roll of the dice option if you'd rather play matchups than starting your studs, if those studs do have some pretty unfortunate matchups in week 13 and 14. So, that being said, let's take a look at, I almost forgot. We have a third quarterback, and once again, another guy here that is very much in the exact same place. So I'll go pretty quick with this because I feel like I'm going to end up repeating myself. Braxton Woodson out of Navy. One, you should know immediately, he's on bye. Final games against Memphis, that's a good matchup, assuming he starts. But if he does start, we've seen enough from Woodson this year because Horvath keeps getting knocked out of these games. We know Woodson can step in and be an immediate contributor for this Navy offense, right? He doesn't even have to play a full game. And last week, 9 rush attempts, 103 yards, and 2 touchdowns on the ground. Passing, not so great, right? But again, triple option team, you don't need to have a great passer. He can still put up some really solid points. Again, Memphis, that should be a relatively high-scoring game. But once again, I have no clue what Blake Horvath is dealing with. We've also got a bye between now and the next game, so that's a lot more opportunity for Horvath to get healthy and come back for that last game, in which case Woodson becomes, absolutely kaput in terms of value. But, if you're a team that is just looking to hold on to a guy just in case, I think this is a good place to invest your capital. But again, like most of you are probably already pretty set at quarterback, but in case you're not, those are 3 guys to roll the dice on. If you want more entrenched starters, take a look at our honorable mentions here. Again, Jeff Sims, a 28-point performance this past week. He gets Colorado this week. Awesome. JC French, Georgia Southern, not a great performance this past week, but also is the OJ Arnold show. He gets Old Dominion this week. They're pretty good against the pass, but I also think Georgia Southern can score enough in that game that JC French can probably end the day with 3+ touchdowns. Gunnar Stockton, I put a tweet out about this on Twitter earlier. He gets Charlotte and Georgia Tech to finish the season. Those are 2 pretty soft defenses, and given the fact that Gunnar is now coming off of a 5-touchdown game against Texas and is now firmly in the Heisman discussion, I could see Georgia potentially trying to stat pad him a little bit just to at least try to get him to New York these last couple of weeks. And then a couple familiar names in the last several weeks. Joe Fagnano, he gets FAU this week for UConn. That should be a brilliant matchup there. And then Connor Weigman out of Houston, they get TCU this week. Another really good matchup there. So let's move on to running back, and let's start with the man of the hour, the number 1 overall player in CFF this past week, and that is OJ Arnold, the running back out of Georgia Southern, rostered on 31% of leagues. This blows me away, because last week I very offhandedly talked about OJ Arnold like being a pretty solid pickup off the waiver wire. Had him, I talked about him as an honorable mention. Could be a really nice start against Coastal Carolina because they're atrocious against the run. Because again, like he'd been getting, he had 20 carries against App State, over 100 yards. It looked like he was finally getting that workhorse load after being capped at about 15 touches most games. But never, and I mean never, in my wildest dreams, did I think we were going to get what we got this past Saturday. Holy smokes. An incredible 58.92 fantasy points in this game, even more if you're playing in PPR leagues. That included 267 yards on the ground and 2 touchdowns, 4 catches for 53 yards and a touchdown. He also, just for, craps and giggles, a 73-yard passing touchdown. Like, is there an option beyond the nuclear option? Because, like, it is extremely rare to see a running back just put up this much points for CFF. And we had some monster performances last week. Like, let's be real. But none of them beat out OJ Arnold. Obviously, let's be clear. Arnold will not be doing this again. But there's no reason to think that he still won't be a monster down the stretch, right? Like, the workhorse load is his. The staff have made that abundantly clear the last couple of weeks. He can do anything with that. And if you look at his upcoming schedule, he's got Old Dominion and Marshall to finish out. These are teams with below average run defenses giving up about 160 yards on the ground. I see no reason why if Arnold's given 20 plus touches in both of those games that he won't finish the season with 200 plus yard games and probably at least a touchdown in each of those games to go along with it. I think he'll end up being a pretty good anchor guy for any team in the playoffs that are looking to provide some stability if you're still shaky on a guy that you once relied on. Think Robert Henry managers. So next running back up here is a guy that I liked in the offseason. Another classic, never wrong, just early candidate for me. We got to talk about London Montgomery, the running back out of East Carolina. This past week, 27 rushing attempts for 103 yards and 2 touchdowns. He also caught a pass for 3 yards. I touted London Montgomery during the offseason as the potential next, Rajay Harris for this staff. I was impressed with what I saw last year when he was the backup running back. I thought he was a pretty clear best back in this backfield, even with Parker Jenkins coming in through the transfer portal. And unfortunately for all of us, this staff was pretty insistent on having a 3-headed monster in this backfield between Montgomery, Parker Jenkins, and Marlon Gunn. And then later on, they added Engelman to that mix. It was just a mess for a good chunk of the year. And it's only taken them until recently to see that Montgomery is, again, their best back and deserves a bigger workload, which he is now getting. In the last game against Memphis, again, I mentioned it, season high 27 carries against the Tigers, 28 if you count his reception. This came after 2 weeks of him getting kind of his usual 14 to 17 touches against Temple and Charlotte. However, in those games against Temple and Charlotte, Montgomery caught fire, averaging over 6 yards a carry in both of them and surpassing 80 yards in a pretty limited workload. He also scored in both affairs, and as we saw this past week, that earned him the volume that we saw against Memphis, and he paid it off again. Like I said, over 100 yards, 2 touchdowns. Of course, our hope here is that this isn't just a hot hand situation and that the coaching staff continues to roll with Montgomery, because if they do, East Carolina and Montgomery have a really nice finish to the season here. UTSA and Florida Atlantic, 2 teams that are giving up 175 plus yards on the ground every single game. That sets up really nicely for Montgomery. FIU is particularly atrocious here, giving up 220 yards on average. So if you give me Montgomery, you give me 15 to 20 touches against that level of defense, I think Montgomery could end up being a solid difference maker these last couple of weeks. Again, assuming this isn't a hot hand situation, and the moment that Montgomery gets 5 carries for 10 yards, the coaching staff just says, nope, we'll go with the next guy, and then you're stuck holding the bag. So, last guy we'll discuss here is very similar to the quarterback situation where I'm kind of relying on injury, I'm relying on recency bias here, but Will Henderson's one you have to look at these last couple of weeks, right? With Henry just fallen apart these last couple of weeks, Henderson has stepped up, and really this last week we saw a really good showing. 19 carries, 185 yards, almost 10 yards a carry for as well as a touchdown. He also had a catch for 6 yards. He's been the better performing running back for UTSA recently. He's been getting the touchdowns. He has been more efficient. Even if Henry comes back from whatever knocked him out of last week's game, I don't know that Henderson really gives back this RB1 job. He's just been the better performer, and it'd be coaching malpractice not to continue to give it to him unless, Henry comes back and it's just an absolute menace, rips off like an 80-yard touchdown on the first touch or something like that. So the only thing that really kind of hangs me up here, because if this was just generic, UTSA RB1, let's roll with that. His final 2 games are East Carolina and Army. Against the run, East Carolina is in the top 30, giving up just under 120 yards per game. Army is top 45. They're only giving up about 135. This combination of East Carolina and Army actually brings back flashbacks, because this is the exact combo of teams that I was talking about me being worried about with all those Temple players I referred to a couple of weeks ago, saying that, that's a tough stretch of teams right there. And if Temple can get through those teams, that's great. Well, guess what? Temple fell apart against both of those defenses. So I am scared that UTSA might meet a similar state here in the middle of the playoffs. So that's like my one major drawback with Will Henderson here. And again, obviously, Robert Henry coming back could throw things off again. These running backs coming back have really kind of thrown things off. Like Antoine Roberts got completely thrown in the trash last week the moment Michael Allen came back, even though Michael Allen didn't actually have that many touches. But it was just enough to have Roberts be thrown in the trash. It was wild, and there's been other such cases as well. And a couple of other cases here that I'm not going to list on the honorable mention, but, wants to keep an eye out for if you want to take that risk and try to, take advantage of things here at the end. Jaden Nixon, running back at UCF. Miles Montgomery did not play this past week. We don't know if he'll play next week. If he doesn't, Nixon against Oklahoma State's defense could be absolutely phenomenal. And then the Washington situation as well, right? Jonah Coleman, questionable going into this last week's game, did not play. Adam Muhammad was the RB1 for Washington. He ran 17 times for 59 yards and 3 touchdowns. Very Jonah Coleman-esque stat line there. And if Jonah Coleman is out again this week, one, that would suck for me. But two, Muhammad should be awesome, right? UCLA is who they're facing this week. They're 119th versus the run, giving up just under 200 yards rushing per game. I think Muhammad, if Coleman is out again, he'll be a very startable option there. But again, it all comes down to whether or not these guys are healthy. Like keep an eye on Robert Henry, Miles Montgomery, and Jonah Coleman this week. Other honorable mentions at running back, Caleb Komolafay. Not his best game this last week against Michigan, but still managed to find the end zone. That provides you a nice safe floor, even though he's going up against Minnesota this week. I trust that Komolafay will find the end zone in that game as well, and I do think he'll perform better than what he did against Michigan. Probably find his way somewhere around the 60, 70 yards in that game finish. So if you're looking for just a solid 13, 15 points, probably where you go with Komolafay this week. Kejuan Brown. I think I'm ready to say Kejuan Brown going forward is a matchup-proof starter, considering the fact that I was worried these next couple of weeks between Clemson and SMU. They're both terrible against the pass, but really good against the run, so maybe the production won't be there, and maybe Brown can find a touchdown. It was actually the complete opposite. Brown has for 2 weeks in a row gotten the production. 14 carries for 136 yards against Cal and 15 carries for 135 yards against Clemson. No touchdowns in either one of those games because for some reason, Jeff Brom wants to hand off 180-pound Duke Watson the goal line carries and, let Miller Moss, who can hardly move at all, run the goal line carries. But, Kejuan Brown, who's putting his body out on the line, basically getting you a first down every time he touches the ball. No, we can't reward him with any touchdowns. That'll change. And Louisville versus SMU, I fully expect them to be able to move the ball there. And that Brown should be able to find the end zone once again and probably put up a very similar stat line to what he put up this past week. Austin Dendy, he didn't play this past week, but he gets Akron this week. That's a great matchup right there. He's been very solid for the Falcons. He should be good to go there. Jordan Simmons officially on workhorse duty for Georgia State. Absolutely phenomenal this past week, including a 90-plus yard touchdown there. Even better than his performance the week before, almost 8.6 yards per carry. Obviously, I don't expect it to completely stay going forever, but, you get Troy this week. They're 120th versus the run. That's another great matchup for Simmons. I would fully play him if I had him on my roster. And then Jordan Gant, a solid performance this past week against Kent State. 96 yards and a touchdown. He gets Bowling Green this week. They're pretty average versus the run, so I expect Gant to be able to put up another nice performance. Let's move on to wide receivers. Again, some solid options this week, although, again, there's always going to be that noise, that itch in the back of your brain telling you that, guys breaking out this late can't be relied on. You're probably right. But we can start with Marcel Williams here. Like I said, it's always sketchy. It's sketchy grabbing guys that are breaking out this late in the season. It's even more sketchy grabbing guys who are performing on bad teams. because like one team level collapse in the playoffs here, and this player is just cooked no matter what. But I also think it'll be malpractice to kind of ignore the ascension of players this late in the season, especially if they're a young guy who is taking advantage of his opportunities, and Marcel Williams absolutely fits that bill. Over the last 3 weeks, Williams has seen 33 targets, 24 receptions, 384 yards, and 2 touchdowns in 3 games. For those that don't want to do the math, that means he's averaging 11 targets, 8 receptions, 128 yards, and 0.66 touchdowns. So, 2 touchdowns in 3 games, right? A lot of that does come from his 200-plus yard performance this past week, but in each of the other 2 games, he's had 74-plus yards. If you can keep that this upcoming week, that's more than playable, especially if you're able to find a touchdown to go along with that. And given his volume recently, if he's in a PPR league, it'll still be fine. He gets one more chance here to dazzle us. This upcoming week, he gets Bowling Green. Pretty neutral matchup on paper. They're 51st versus the pass, 79th versus the run, as I mentioned with Gant. So I would pretty much expect Akron to do what they normally do here. And if that's the case, then again, given what we've seen the last 3 weeks, Marcel Williams should be once again favored here. After that, unfortunately, Akron is one of 2 teams with buys on championship week. Again, I cannot wait to go back to single buys next year. But if you're a team who's looking for help in a singular week this week, because a guy like, Omar Cooper is on bye this week, then Williams is a place that I would for sure look. Another place that I would look, though, is Southern Miss wide receiver Elijah Metcalf. This Southern Miss offense is Blake Anderson's offense, which means the entire CFF world has been waiting on a wide receiver to emerge as the next Devin Tompkins or Omar Bayless or however many other wide receivers we have seen over the years with Blake Anderson. But unfortunately, for most of the season, we just straight up did not get that. Carl Chester was probably the closest we got to, and that, close is very relative because we're talking about a guy that averaged just over 4 targets a game, averaged under 35 yards per game. Again, just abject misery for those of us that have been chasing that system. And, things have shifted, though. Over the last couple of weeks, we've seen a pretty big shift in this team's priority when it comes to the passing game. After being quiet for most of the season here, Elijah Metcalf, 27 targets in his last 3 games. And he is very, very clearly the wide receiver 1 for the Eagles going forward. With those 27 targets, Metcalf has averaged over the last 3 games 7.3 receptions, 111.7 yards, and again, 0.6 touchdowns. I'm not sure really what led to this change. Obviously, they come off a bye week and stuff like that, but it could also do with, Landry Liddy getting a lot more run with Braxton kind of being banged up all the time. So maybe he just favors the slot guys like Metcalf. Regardless, I don't really care how. Well, I kind of care because, again, if this is quarterback dependent, that is a pretty big deal. But regardless, I see a trend here. And the hope is that this just doesn't stop. Metcalf on paper looks like he has 2 rough matchups to finish the season here with South Alabama and Troy, as they both rank inside the top 30 for pass defense. However, both of those teams are outside the top 120 in rush defense. This means 2 things. 1, the secondary stats probably inflated because most teams will just choose to run against South Alabama and Troy. Secondly, this still means that South, even if those secondaries are pretty solid, it does mean that Southern Miss should still be able to move the ball against these defenses. It'll just come on the ground, but that'll still open up scoring opportunities, right? Even if the passing volume, like I said, is drawn back in favor of rushing, Southern Miss will be able to move the ball and give the receivers a chance in the red zone when they get down there. I think Metcalf is pretty easily worth a grab for any team wanting to shore up their wide receiver room for the last couple of weeks. I think he's got some really good matchups here towards the end. Let's roll with that. Last wide receiver we'll highlight here is another kind of safe floor guy the last couple of weeks, but he's really kind of quietly come on for a team that struggled so much offensively. Turns out you make a quarterback switch and get rid of the guy that's mostly interested in just flashing the amount of NIL that he got, and you actually put somebody out there that wants to prove themselves, a guy like Cutter Boley, who's performed pretty dang well for the Wildcats recently. And his best friend recently has been Kendrick Law, the wide receiver out of Kentucky, rostered on 10% of leagues. Last several games here, 24 targets in 3 games, and has been pulling them in at just an insane rate. Like I said, 24 targets, 23 receptions in 3 games. Like, he has just not been letting the ball hit the ground. The efficiency isn't great here, right? Again, like, you get 6 catches for 44 yards against Florida, 6 catches for 49 yards against Auburn. But let's be very clear, that's 2 really good defenses. Then Law comes in, gets 124 yards and 11 catches versus Tennessee Tech. Obviously a much easier defense than what we have been seeing. So I imagine these last couple of weeks we'll fall somewhere kind of in the middle here. Especially against Vanderbilt. They're vulnerable against the pass in a big way. I think Law will have himself a pretty nice game there. Hopefully get a touchdown to go along with that. The real question mark is Louisville. Louisville's very solid on defense. They're 36 versus the pass, giving up just over 200 yards per game. They're very stout versus the run as well. So I do wonder if Kentucky's going to have a very similar game like they had against Florida, like they had against Auburn. Although I say that Kentucky obviously did very well offensively versus Florida. Granted, a lot of that was, turnovers happening because of Lagway. Regardless, I would be more than willing to pick up Law this week and start him against Vanderbilt. I think that's a good matchup. The Louisville matchup is definitely a lot more iffy, but if you're stuck in a situation where you might need a safe floor play, a guy that can get you double-digit points, maybe Law is the guy to go with there. So, honorable mentions, we'll run through these pretty quick. Jacob DeJesus is on bye this week. Remember the last time we saw him, we saw 23 targets, 16 catches, 153 yards, and a touchdown. A beautiful end-of-the-year schedule here with Stanford and SMU, both teams giving up 280-plus through the air. Jacob DeJesus should eat in both of those games. Alex Perry, man, this is a guy that, again, another guy I was never wrong just early on. Perry's become the clear number 1 wide receiver for FIU down the stretch here. 11 targets, 8 catches, 88 yards, and a touchdown this past week. Beautiful end of schedule here as well. Jacksonville State and Sam Houston, especially if Pizanski continues to be the one throwing him the ball. I like him as a pickup option this week. Still available in 98% of leagues, by the way. Parker Kingston for BYU. They get a nice matchup against Cincinnati this week. UCF, they get in championship week. On paper, UCF's defense is really solid against the pass. They're 18th in the country. However, I do wonder if UCF will be on quit watch by that point. And if BYU is, trying to make a playoff appearance, they're going to want to bulldoze anybody in their way. So I think Kingston's startable in both of those options. Jordan Hudson, you got, again, 100-yard games in 3 of his last 4 games. The matchups aren't great to finish, right? You got, Louisville and California both giving up just over 200 yards per game. I still think Hudson can find a way to have a decent day with both of those games, but, I wouldn't say he was a top priority. Sheldon Sampson, though, by the way, very much a top priority. Finishes the season against Arkansas State and UL Monroe, 2 defenses that are quite porous, and it's been very clear that he's the wide receiver 1 for Louisiana Lafayette going forward. Very much a premier pickup right now on the waiver wire. Amari Thomas, last time we saw him, 9 targets, 5 catches, 103 yards, and a touchdown against, again, a UCF secondary, though, supposed to be very good. He didn't care. He gets TCU and Baylor to end the season. Those are teams that, are vulnerable in some way, shape, or form on defense, so there's going to be some scoring opportunities there. And it doesn't matter. They're going to be looking Thomas's way 8-9 times a game, pretty much every single time. So, yeah, very much a guy you can pick up. CJ Williams out of Stanford. Not great matchups to end the season, but he's basically been good for, 60, 70 yards and a touchdown. So if you're looking for a solid play in both the weeks, that can give you a pretty safe floor. CJ Williams is probably your guy. Chris Dawn, another great week for him. He got, I lost it. Yeah, there he is. 5 targets, 5 catches, 117 yards, and a touchdown versus Southern Miss this past week. So, yeah. he's doing pretty well. He gets some nice matchups here against UL Monroe and South Alabama. Yes, I mentioned earlier, South Alabama's got a really good secondary when it comes to defending the pass, but also, again, so much of that has to do with, people being able to run on them. Texas State will probably run all over them as well, but Chris Dawn should be able to eat and get some touchdown opportunities in that game regardless. And then my boy, Braden Pagan. Touchdowns elude him for whatever reason, but he has been good for 100 yards in a ton of games this year. Hopefully we can fix that touchdown problem. I will say, though, I don't love these final two matchups against Fresno State and Boise State, two teams that are giving up less than 180 yards passing per game. Granted, there's not a ton of great quarterback play in the Mountain West, so that's probably inflated just a little bit. Regardless, hopefully Pagan can, just continue to be that consistent producer these last couple of weeks. So, finish up real quick here. We got a couple of tight end honorable mentions I want to throw out here. Juice Vereen, he did not play this past week, but it sounds like that he should be good to go this next week. Lance Mason, the tight end of Wisconsin. Wisconsin doesn't have a lot going for them. Lance Mason is one of those things that is. Jaron Johnson, tight end out of Bowling Green, has been pretty solid in terms of his production. Again, not a lot of touchdowns, but, if you're looking for like a full PPR option, I would maybe go that way. Josh Cuevas out of Alabama has become a huge piece of that passing game. I really didn't think he'd ever would be. I kind of saw him more as a blocking option before the season started, but, glad guys can prove me wrong. And then Dylan Wade, not a lot of touchdowns, not a ton of productions, but the dude is very high on the list of tight ends in terms of their number of receptions for this year. I believe he got a touchdown even this past week, so maybe that kind of gives him a boost the rest of the season here. So in a full PPR league, I absolutely would go after Dylan Wade. Let's finish up with some DST streaming options. Again, this week is pretty golden. You could check almost every SEC team. A lot of ACC teams are playing some really nice cupcake matchups, so you can take advantage of that. Texas A&M, one of the major ones. Again, all the ones I have listed on the screen are 30% or less. That's my goal. And so, yeah, Texas A&M, they're facing Stanford this week. That should be a easy DST start. South Carolina, they will be playing a Samari Collier-less Coastal Carolina team, which I mentioned before. That, without Samari Collier, that Coastal Carolina team was averaging well below 20 points a game. And so, not only are they now missing him, they're going up against a Power 4 defense here, and I do not care what South Carolina's defense has been doing against SEC competition. They are more than good enough, more than talented enough to completely shut down Coastal Carolina. Northern Illinois has had a solid defense in the MAC all season long. They get Western Michigan this week. That is a game I've already checked. That's an over-under 38.5. I wouldn't be shocked if both of these teams end up with under 20 points in this game. So Northern Illinois' defense is a pretty good start in my opinion. Washington's defense against UCLA, maybe they get Nico Iamaleava back this week for UCLA, so that might make this a little bit less appetizing of a game here, or of a start here. But if Iamaleava comes back, he's coming off a concussion, maybe he doesn't perform as well. And especially if they don't have Iamaleava, then I'm absolutely starting Washington's defense against UCLA. And the last but not least here, we're just picking on Oklahoma State's offense here. But as I mentioned before, UCF, they've got a pretty solid secondary. They're a little bit more porous versus the run, so maybe Oklahoma State can take advantage of that, but I don't really think Oklahoma State's really in any kind of position to take advantage of anything at this point. And so, yeah, we'll just keep starting DSTs that are facing Oklahoma State any given week. With that being said, we've come to the end of our show. Appreciate all of you guys for listening. We are hitting right at an hour. So, well done to me there. I was a little concerned after I got done with the freak out scale guys that I was going to run a little long today, but that's not the case. Regardless, if you guys have not already, make sure you leave a like, a comment, subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube. If you're on the podcast side of things, make sure you follow the show, leave a 5-star review wherever you can. Make sure you guys check out the rest of the Campus to Canton podcast network for shows ranging on pretty much anything you can think of related to the college fantasy game. Till then, See you guys on Tuesday night. Again, we'll have a guest. We'll answer your start-sit questions, which I imagine will be more important than a lot of the information you're getting here. So make sure to tune into that. Until then, really appreciate you guys, and I hope you guys have a wonderful and blessed week. Good luck with your semifinals. See y'all.